What an exceptional leader. But Marty Dempsey, as the CG, a 2-star, set the example in every one of those 4 C's. Himself and his security team knew those fundamentals. They were ready. If the enemy messed with them, they got a very severe response, and a very quick one because they knew their job. And it started with him. That example was set. They knew he cared about his troops, and 1st Armored Division was an exceptional unit in combat. But it starts at the top with the leader.
Welcome to the Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm honored to welcome a true expert in leadership fundamentals, General Mike Scaparrotti. General Scaparrotti has a distinguished military career, becoming an Army Ranger, serving as the 69th Commandant of Cadets at West Point, and ultimately serving as the Supreme Allied Commander Europe and Commanding General of the United States European Command. His extensive experience leading large and complex organizations gives him unique insights into why every leader, regardless of rank, must master and consistently practice the fundamentals. General, thank you for joining me today on the Science of Leadership, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's good to be here. I appreciate it. I'm pretty excited about the work you've been doing, so I appreciate to take part in it.
Well, let's just jump right in, sir, to today's topic. When you and I talked before, I asked you 5 leadership maxims that you always try to keep in mind. And your first one was, regardless of rank, a leader must know and practice the fundamentals. Before we really drill down on what those are, could you explain generally what you mean by that?
Well, every profession and every position within each profession has the basics, the fundamental knowledge, attributes, and skills that you've got to have to succeed. And that's really what I'm talking about, making sure you know these, and then realizing that as you increase in leadership position, that you're never above that. You've got to retain those fundamentals and focus on them.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that clarification. Now that we have that, when you say that leaders need to know and practice those fundamentals, what are the fundamentals in your mind?
Well, when I think about it, I think about fundamentals of the profession or the position you're in, but there's also fundamentals of leadership. And the fundamentals of leadership really get back to how do you treat people?
Mm-hmm.
What's your relationship with the people around you, both above and below you, and how you lead? And I think that's one of the fundamentals. Do you treat people with respect? Do you appreciate the folks around you and the role each one of them plays, regardless of their position? You've always heard about how do leaders treat those who have perhaps the most menial job or the one that most everyone would dislike, the janitor in the organization, right, etc. Does he acknowledge him or her and appreciate what they do? I think that's a fundamental. And then within the position of profession, there's blocking and tackling, you might call it, the basics that you're expected to know, knowledge about your job, skills and attributes about your job as well. And if you fail to do that, generally you're not going to be nearly as successful or successful at all. When I talked to you about it, I went to some C's, 3 C's I'll cover today real quick. The first one that I bring up is care. You got to care about and for people. And subordinates around you, regardless of where you work, they know whether you really care. Just by your attention to them, your knowledge of them, and how you react to things that happen to them. And it makes a difference. So as a leader, you got to care. I always believe that in the military, subordinates expected a leader to be competent, which is the next C. Mm-hmm. And so they look to see, does that leader really care? Because that tells them a lot about whether or not they're going to care for them, make decisions that are concerned about them. So that's care. The second one is competence. As I said, in most jobs, you would expect your leader to be competent, but that's the skills and the knowledge and the attributes that you've got to have to just lead properly. There are some that come into jobs that really don't understand the job, and they've got a steep learning curve. If they don't learn, those fundamentals, they're not going to succeed. nor will they be respected by the people around them, I believe. And
Mhm.
then finally, I think the most important of these is probably character. And that has to do with doing the right thing in what you say and do. Your actions have integrity with your statements, your requirements for those around you, your policies. And then there's another aspect of this, and that's just doing the right thing.
Mhm.
Morally, what people would expect would be the right thing with respect to how you treat others, how you do a job. Tom, what I think when we talked, I told you that to me, I think that trumps competence. I would take someone that I had to continue to develop in terms of competency, but absolute character over somebody that was perhaps just a whiz at this,
Mhm.
supremely competent, but I had a flaw in character. I couldn't trust him. I wouldn't have him on the team. That's just how important it is.
Yes, sir. You've seen the excerpts and parts of the chapters that where you appeared in the book that I've been working on. You may not know that the overarching structure of the book that I've been working on, based on the interviews with you all, has 4 C's. So I analyzed all the 4 stars, all their responses, and you actually delineated 3 of the 4 C's, and the fourth one was communication. And if you can't communicate clearly with people, then even if you have great character and these things, you just can't lead very well. So the fourth one was communication, but yeah, character, competence, caring, communication are the 4. And I think you are exactly right that if you don't have that bedrock of character, then it doesn't matter really how great you are at all these other things. It will fall apart eventually. I remember when I interviewed General Charles Krulak, who was commandant of the Marine Corps. He didn't care about anything. Like he was like, if you don't have character, it doesn't matter. Like that was
Right.
he was really animated, I'll say, with
Yeah.
regard to his insistence on that. And so I think that those are, just as you say, they're the bedrock, the foundation of great leadership.
I would agree wholeheartedly with the communication aspect of that. And then another thing I think I said to you about character is that when I saw a charismatic leader that had the wrong values, it was usually because there was a disaster. And what I mean by that was a charismatic leader with the wrong values takes an entire group of people in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And it's really devastating to an organization.
Can you share a story from your career that really sort of exemplifies what it looks like to practice these fundamentals and how that affected a given mission?
Yeah. So I'll start with at the lower level in Iraq with First AD out on battlefield circulation. There was an attack on a unit, and I moved to that unit's location. They had been ambushed, and I mean, it was an ambush that was set up pretty well, but they reacted properly, came out of it okay. And I was talking to the lieutenant and the platoon sergeant afterwards, and the platoon leader said to me, the troops didn't want to go through the battle drills before we left the compound this morning because we do them every day. Okay, fundamentals, right?
Mhm.
The fundamental battle drills, react to contact. He said, I almost gave in. The platoon sergeant and I said, nope, we got a duty here. We got to make sure they're ready. He said to me, I'm glad we did that. And I said, you know what? You doing your job right, holding high standards, and sticking to the fundamentals probably saved some soldiers' lives today because that wasn't a mediocre ambush. You were
Yeah.
fortunate that you did it right. So, I mean, that's the lower level of, a leader doing his job, caring enough about troops to have high standards and make them do it. And then knowing that they were good at the fundamentals, that fundamental battle drill. So when it happened, no one just went back to whatever. They went back to the habit they were trained to have, and it came out fine. It would have been chaos otherwise. And then you can go to the upper end of it. In First AD, our leader was General Dempsey, and I think you talked to him as
Yes,
well,
sir.
Marty Dempsey. What an exceptional leader! But Marty Dempsey, as the CG, a 2-star, set the example in every one of those 4 C's, and he was out sharing danger with troops in battlefield circulation. But himself and his security team knew those fundamentals. They were ready. If the enemy messed with them, they got a very severe response and a very quick one because they knew their job. And it started with him. That example was set. They knew he cared about his troops, and First Armored Division was an exceptional unit in combat. But it starts at the top with the leader.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't practice the fundamentals, if you don't show that they're highly valuable and important, then nobody else will either.
Exactly. For the viewers, I mean, think about sports teams and great coaches. Sports teams do football, for instance, the blocking and tackling almost every practice. Now,
Mm-hmm.
by then, they've been doing this for a long time. By the time they're in college, but they still do the fundamentals, and all the good coaches do the same thing. There's a reason for all of this. High performance unit does the fundamentals well.
Yeah, it is intrinsic, and we'll get to an example of very basic fundamentals here shortly. Just thinking about that and moving into this next sort of thing, thinking about the value of fundamentals and the role they play.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about this, this topic specifically from the perspective of some of our listeners, there could be some people who are skeptical. They might be thinking, I don't have time for that, to worry about the fundamentals, do these things. I have a deadline or a productivity target that I need to hit, or I just want people to do their jobs or whatever it may be. What do you say to them? Why is it so important for leaders to know and practice the fundamentals?
Well, I think, it's actually not unusual for a leader to be pressured by time, perhaps, and decide not just to take the time to stop and talk to that individual to show they care, to be pressured by time and not go out and do the battlefield circulation or leadership by walking around, it might be called, right? Because
Yeah.
it takes their time. But what they'll find is if they bypass all of that, they're actually not, over the longer term, more successful. They're less so because they've broken the communication, they've broken that integrity with their people in terms of those fundamentals. So I think that's the first thing. You've got to understand that it's so important that you have to make it a priority. I said earlier that high performance units do these well. That's another reason that I think that people ought to look at it. But let's go to the flip side. Let's say that you've got a unit like this leader that you described that may not have time.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get ready for what I call a snapshot in time. They're going to enforce standards, et cetera, to get ready for this one thing where they're going to shine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they try and do. The problem with that is astute people around them know that that is in fact just a snapshot in time. They know that they're not reliable consistently. They look for organizations that consistently perform at a high standard. And those units, those leaders practice the fundamentals, not a snapshot in time, not something that's pressured by time and I'm just going to do it that way today.
Mm-hmm.
That's another reason for that being valuable. And then lastly, what I would tell you is that what do people do under pressure? Now, in our profession, in the military, under pressure is a crisis. I mean, it's combat perhaps, but a lot of organizations and people listening to you today do things that are dangerous. All right. Most of those things require what? A license or accreditation or something like that. Why? Because there's risk involved. And there again, there's fundamentals they have to practice. And when they fail to do that, what happens? Something bad, typically,
Yeah.
something undesirable. And so you want fundamentals known well because when the unknown comes up, people react a specific way just out of nature and not an unknown way or in a way that they're not confident that they can deal with the situation. Units that are trained in fundamentals have a confidence that they can deal with the unknown for the same reason. So that's the reason I would look at it that way. It's just day to day we see change, we see the unknown, and when you practice the fundamentals, people are confident in how to deal with them.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing those ideas and the value of practicing the fundamentals with us, with the listeners, and with me, certainly. As I was thinking about this, I thought of a couple of basketball examples of fundamentals. And the first is from the movie Hoosiers, where, Gene Hackman they've made it to the state championship or whatever, and he takes them in there and he measures the height of the goal. This is how tall is it? It's 10 feet. Okay. It's the same as it was back home, right? And how far is it to the free throw line? It's 12 feet, same. And
Mhm.
so that if you are expert in your fundamentals, the environment can change, but you still can do your job the way it needs to be done. And so that was one thing. But then the other, Coach John Wooden, and some of our listeners will know who he was, but he was a Hall of Fame basketball coach who led the UCLA Bruins. I forget, from like the 1950s to the late 70s or something. A long storied career at UCLA, and they won 10 national championships, and 12 of those, and won those in 12 years. 7 years in a row they won the national championship, which is
Yeah.
incredible. But at the beginning of every season, he would sit down with his players and he would teach them how to put their socks on. And the new guys thought he was joking. But he wasn't joking. He knew that if you put your socks on incorrectly, that could lead to blisters, and that could prevent the players from being able to rebound or shoot or play defense. And so for him, it was really always about the fundamentals. He didn't actually care about how other teams played. He didn't care what their ranking was or their scoring or any of that. It was, are we practicing the fundamentals? Are we doing the best we can with the fundamentals of basketball? If we do that, his philosophy was, it will
Yeah.
pay off. And it did. Nobody else has ever come remotely close to the success of those UCLA Bruins under Coach Wooden. And so that's something that came to mind. And for those who would be interested, I would recommend this book, Wooden on Leadership. It covers a lot of that. It covers the story about the Sox. It's just got some phenomenal leadership principles in it. That was something that came to my mind. And Scap, this story reminds me of something else that from the Army. Okay, and maybe you can speak to this, but it reminds me of something my dad used to say. So my dad served a couple tours in Vietnam, and I can't tell you how many times he would say, "Always take care of your feet." Like, he would perseverate, and I guess it was because of trench foot or jungle rot or whatever they called it, right? But his experience in Vietnam and the casualties, legitimate casualties, and so forth that can arise just from failing to take care of your feet.
Yeah. No, it's very common in warfare, in fact. Whether it's hot weather and trench foot, etc., wet weather, wet conditions like in swamps, or cold weather conditions. If soldiers don't take care of their feet, those are casualties. They're no longer in the unit. They're not fighting. They're getting medevaced out. So, what I think about I was in 10th Mountain Division for 2 tours, and that's upstate New York. Obviously, most of the year it's pretty dang cold and a lot of snow. It's in the snow belt. Squad leaders there and leaders had to make sure that they were routinely checking their soldiers' socks and feet to make sure that they were dry. They were changing their socks because that wet weather, you had to do that, particularly if you're marching, etc. They become damp. If they didn't, they're going to be a cold casualty. They're going to be, they're going to get frostbite or something like that, and they're going to have to be medevac. And we were so serious about it that if you had a unit that showed more than 1 or 2, they had a frostbite, even 1, you'd go right to the squad leader. Okay, have you been checking these feet? Have you been doing the right thing as a leader, taking care of your soldiers, right? And if it was more than a few, then a company commander could potentially get relieved because we just didn't. We knew right away, okay, you're not taking care of troops, so you're not doing the fundamentals. It's very clear you have to do this, and it was that severe in terms of the punishment.
Yeah, it has tremendous impacts. Again, as we said earlier, the soldiers, whoever you're leading, right, in your companies or whatever, they're looking to you as the example. If you fall down on that, if you don't uphold the standard, and if you're not practicing those 4 things, then they won't either. And that has real consequences and can be major devastating issues for a given organization. So, by all means, folks, take care of your feet.
Well, take care of your feet. Actions
Yeah.
speak louder than words, too, is what comes to mind.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as I was preparing for our conversation today, I was trying to think of, a great example of how failing and to know and practice fundamentals has resulted in a bad outcome. And the more I thought about it, I had a hard time thinking of a major failure that wasn't due to practicing the fundamentals, whether it was character, competence, caring, or communication. So, we can think about the collapse of Enron. due to failures of character and arguably competence. The Challenger explosion was born out of a lack of competence to know or the character to admit that there could be problems with the O-rings in cold weather. Thinking back to the Titanic, the steel, the construction were skimped on to save money, and then, and so that's a character issue. But then the Cunard line that manufactured the Titanic and then operated it wanted to set the transatlantic crossing time record, and that took priority over the safety and the lives of their people. And so that's a lack of care. And do we even need to get into things like Mao's China or Pol Pot's Cambodia or Hitler's Reich? All those were catastrophes of character. So anyway, the more I thought about it, it was really hard for me to not see leadership failures in just about any domain as examples of failures on those fundamental character, competence, caring, communication precepts.
Yeah, I agree. And as I said earlier, I mean, I think character trumps competence. If you got to choose between the two, just as General Krulak said, it's got to be character. It's got to be absolute.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. The other thing is that I'd mentioned to you is, I've said this already, but leaders, over time, they establish the environment in an organization. For the listeners who aren't in the military, you've got a work environment. It over time will portray, in many ways, the habits of the senior leader. That's the way it really works, and I've seen it time and again in my career. So, what the leader does or doesn't do gives authority to those below them to perhaps skirt rules, do other things they shouldn't be doing, treat people improperly. And throughout my career, I saw that impact units where you would have a unit that had 2 or 3 problems, right? Maybe disrespect of people, discrimination, perhaps indiscipline. But when you look into that unit, if it was if it was kind of a pattern, invariably the senior leader was who created that pattern because they were acting in the same way.
Yeah. When you said about, character being, if you don't have that, then you're in trouble, basically. I was reminded of a quote by General Schwarzkopf, who I'm sure you knew well, but the quote goes, and I feel like there's a qualifier that I'm going to miss on this, but leadership is a combination of strategy and character. But if you have to be without one, be without the strategy.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. So for those who've been listening to our prior episodes, you'll be already familiar with what the science shows about these fundamentals regarding character. Numerous studies have consistently shown that leaders of strong character foster trust, lead to increased psychological safety and collaboration, as well as decision-making. Organizations with competent leaders have improved performance, better employee satisfaction, engagement, and retention, and better problem solving. Leaders who care about those that we lead have increased engagement and productivity, better team collaboration, and decreased turnover. And the final fundamental, communication, is just as important as any of those based on the science. Effective leader communication is associated with increased employee satisfaction and motivation, as well as enhanced performance, innovation, and adaptability. And that's just to name a few. So ultimately, the science really shows that leaders who are more effective when we do these things with regard to knowing and practicing the fundamentals are going to lead teams that are just going to accomplish so much more and be longer lasting.
Yeah, absolutely.
General Scap, we've covered what those invaluable leadership fundamentals are, and we've talked about why they're important. What advice do you have for our listeners on how to improve their knowledge and practice of those fundamentals?
The first thing I would say is you got to be intentional about development. You can't be laissez-faire about it. I mean, you need to actually have a plan and be intentional about developing those habits, those traits. 2, what helps you do that? I found keeping a journal. Record your observations of leaders, good and bad, and the outcome of units. And then, more importantly, too, just record your own. Every Friday, make it a habit to sit back and say, okay, what happened this week? How'd I do? What could I have done better? What did I really screw up? And what do I need to change in terms of my habits or my decision-making processes? And don't forget the things that seem to go well. too often things go okay and we think that was good enough, but actually a little different approach by a leader, by yourself, may have turned out an even better product. Things you miss. So don't just, gloss over it was a good week, everything went okay. Actually sit down and think about, those fundamentals and your decision making process and how it made a difference. And then the final one I would say is stay current. Man, we're changing. Our world is changing right now rapidly. Look at the emerging technologies, and they're impacting every field that you could work in. So there's some things here that will become fundamental knowledge that we haven't dealt with before, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
leaders have to tackle that. And if you're a more senior leader, it's probably a little more daunting, a little harder, right? So in that case, do your own homework, but ask your subordinates to help you get trained. They'll know it's emerging, they'll know it's new, and they'll appreciate the fact that the boss will allow them to show them some expertise. So I think those are 3 ways I would think about it. The most important being be intentional, have a plan.
Yes, sir. That's great advice on this. Some things that I was thinking about, other than listening to, engaging with, and practicing all these concepts that we share here weekly on the Science of Leadership, the things that I thought of as far as how to is, first, make up your mind to do it, to become that kind of leader who embodies character, competence, caring, communication. Hold yourself to it, and to some degree, you hit on that with regard to journaling and keeping track, right? Because then you can say, hey, what did I really do? What did other people see me really do? Admiral Jim Hogg was a participant in my study, and he said that he thought about every evening of his career, and he had a long career. He said, every day at the end of the day, you're a better person or you're worse, and it's all up to you. Yep. I think that's I have a hard time thinking of a better way to end off our conversation today than that.
I saw a similar quote when I was, I was a 4-star. I was in Korea, and I put it at the bottom of my note card that I would carry around every day. Mm-hmm. And, history is his story, but history, you're making history today. That's what I put at the bottom. And it can be either good or for ill. You make that difference yourself. It's kind of the same thing. And I just wrote that right at the bottom of my card. You're making history today. What is it? Good or not?
Yeah, that is poignant. And I don't have much else to add than that. So,
well, I enjoyed it. And thanks for the work you're doing, the podcast, et cetera, and the book in particular.
Yes, sir. Well, I look forward to getting a finished product out so that you'll be able to read it. But General Scaparrotti, it has been an absolute honor to have you on the Science of Leadership today. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you, Tom. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.